We're back with Season 7, Episode 3 of Flurry of Emotions. This is the episode in which Twilight has to be a babysitter for Flurry Hart, fails at it repeatedly, and then fails to be a good caretaker, guardian, parent, whatever you want to call it. The end. Oh, and also, art, man. It like, speaks to you. Alright. I'm gonna backload most of my issues with this episode, okay? So if you wonder why I'm gonna not specifically address certain issues, it's because I've got a list towards the end of the notes here, okay? Cool. Start at the beginning. Let's get this out of the way right off the bat. Where's Sunburst? I mean, he's literally the crystaller and, like, godparent of Flurry, so... Is he busy? I mean, I can believe he's busy. But you'd think there would be, like, one line of, yeah, Sunburst was busy. Okay, cool. I can accept that. Hang on. So, Shining Armor and Cadence are royalty. Now, this is royalty in MLP, which means they actually have jobs to do. They are actually busy doing actual things. Not having parties, showing off their legs, and playing croquet or whatever. So... they have a full-time job, both of them, and they kind of probably have nannies who could probably help take care of the children, in addition to just, you know, them. Just saying. There's no shame in it. I'm not saying hand off your kid and walk away, because that's dumb for other reasons. That's just what Twilight does. Oh yeah, there's also her grandparents, while we're at the subject. Now, several people in chat have pointed out the obvious counter-argument. Well, we wanted her to go to her, you know, her aunt. Okay, that's cool. That's not at all what's depicted on camera. This is, we desperately need a night off. So, please, anyone take care of this child for us. This implies A, that they don't have nights off, which implies A, no Sunburst, and B, no nannies. And C, no grandparents, and then we rewind up a step, because it also implies B, the fact that this is kind of a last-minute thing, which they didn't plan for at all, which is kind of implicitly stated. And in that circumstance, I kind of feel like having someone in the castle, or in the city, would be better than someone a long train ride over here. Now, yes, I know the art show's over here too, but you get my point. What I'm trying to say is, this episode sucks. Anyways. No, yeah, Spearhead's art exhibit is totally in Ponyville. It's still stupid. But if I can explain, because it's my job to explain why. This is because plot. And that's why I'm pointing it out. This is because plot writing. We need to have... There needs to be no notice. That's important. It needs to be with Twilight. And they need to be razzled and not have had time without their child. Which I'm actually going to cover later. So, for these 3 points to happen, you're at point A, you need to get point B, which is where these 3 points are. You get the quickest, shortest, laziest line between those two things, and that is because plot writing. It's something I constantly bashed Voyager for, because Voyager does that type of writing constantly. Okay, we need this setup, so... bleh, and it's something that doesn't actually make sense and falls apart the more you think about it. This is stupid, is what I'm trying to say. Now, in fairness, because plot episodes can still be good. That's what the cloud effect is when you have a dumb premise that nevertheless manages to nail it. So let's see how this episode actually does. Next thing we cover is that Twilight has been asked to help with the sick foals and go over and take care of them. That's cool, that's cool. Based on the evidence as presented in the episode, she is asked to do this 3 hours before she actually does it. This amount is actually stated outright by Spike in the episode, which means there was no warning or prep time whatsoever. Okay. Now, I don't mean to be a stickler for world building or nuance or stuff that makes sense, but I would like to think that you would probably want a little bit more advanced warning time before you ask the local princess to take some time apart in order to come down to your thing. Now, I know, they all got stuck at the same time. Sure. So I'm just trying to say that this is a little bit eyebrow-raising. Especially said that she apparently has time for this. Now, I've criticized 2 things, but I haven't critiqued 2 things. So let's say how we can smooth this over. First and foremost, let's go ahead and smooth over the things with the former incident, right? So, what's going on with the we need Twilight to be the caretaker thing? Well, we could just restructure this a little bit. Say that Cadence and... So, we'd have to add something to the end of the episode, which I'll get there. But remember that, and don't let me forget, we need to add something to the end of the episode, okay? So don't let me forget about that. Here, I'll just write it down. There. But, we would have it so that they specifically mention how Sunburst is busy. Sunburst is busy, and they have to say it in a particular tone. And they have to have this thing where, you know, the nannies, you know, we wanted to give them a little bit of a break. And again, there has to be a tone with how they're saying that. So we wanted you to have, you know, some time with your favorite aunt and your favorite niece because you haven't seen her in a while and all that's cool. And just kind of smooth it out over and make the art exhibit much more clearly an excuse to get Twilight to Flurry. Now, I want to stress that because it's not about getting time off, right? And that's important. Because the episode stresses the fact that they need a day off. They need a night where... Cadence has a straight-up line where she says... Well, this is kind of weird, but at least... I'm paraphrasing. This is kind of weird, but at least we're not knee-deep in peas at this point. You know, by this point in the night, we'd be knee-deep in peas. This is clearly an intent for them to get a night off. Eject that. That doesn't work. Instead, make it more about trying to get her together with Twilight. Okay, cool. So, we've smoothed over the former problem with some addendums we'll add later. Let's address the second problem, which is this thing was just dropped on her at a moment's notice. That's easy to fix too, actually. Have Twilight mention how she was busy with something. It doesn't matter what. She had something else on her schedule. This is Twilight. She probably has her next month scheduled out. And just come up with something. Again, it doesn't matter what. And have Twilight insist that because this is something that just happened, right? It's a recent development. They just got sick. They're not feeling well. They've had a terrible day because it was class picture day, right? So Twilight is going to drop what she was going to do and reschedule to slot in taking care of these foals tonight. Boom, problem fixed. The idea that Twilight just has an entire evening free is something I find laughable. But anyways. Yeah, or the next 2 months scheduled, yeah. So, 2 problems smoothed over really easily. I would too, S.A. Ross, but let's not get into that. Could have also just kind of roped Pinky in at the beginning, rather than have Twilight go to Pinky and say, hey, I need such and such. Instead, have it be like, I already talked to Pinky, but I figured you could come by. It might cheer them up to see the Princess of Friendship. Right? Again, 1 line of dialogue, smoothed over. It's a good question, Imperial Star Destroyer. So, this has happened so often and so commonly that at this point, I'm pretty sure the writers are doing it on purpose. Now, I don't know. I haven't actually been able to find any information behind the scenes on this. But the fact that any episode that focuses Twilight and Spike has only one of them having a brain is such a recurring element that it has to be on purpose at this point. There's no way. Anyway, so Spike has the brain this episode consistently. In fact, even in the cold open, Spike is the one who's pointing out, hey, we're super busy. I'm just saying. Now, sidebar. Have you ever worked with someone like Twilight in this scenario? Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say you're in the office and you need X done. So you talk to Mr. Red. You're like, hey, Mr. Red. Mr. Red's like, man, I really want a triple cheese pizza tonight. You're like, cool. Mr. Red, can you deal with this? And Mr. Red says, no problem. And you're like, but Mr. Red, you're busy. Yeah, no, I got this. And they're so busy, but they can't say no to people asking for help. So they not only don't get stuff done, but they kind of fail at, you know, all the stuff that they're currently working on, right? I've worked with several people like this. I hate working with people like that. Just say no. Just say no. It's okay. I will accept that you're too busy is the answer, and I'll figure something else out. There is actually Imperial Star Destroyer. That is a true statement. I mean, that is something that's going to happen at some point, Sean. You can only go so far. You'll notice this episode was written by two people who I don't even recognize, by the way. So you can tell that they're starting to farm out, or excuse me, farm in new writing talent in order to try and deal with this, because this is like, you know, we need new people here. I don't remember their names. I wrote them down. Sammy Crawley and Whitney Weta, who have never written anything before and may never write anything again. We'll see. Anyways. Now, I'm sound like I'm coming across as harsh in this episode. Allow me to go ahead and say that I actually kind of like this episode with one gargantuan exception. This is the Voyager equivalent of alliances, for those of you who remember my rant off about that episode. But for those of you who don't, I'll give you a quick summary. Alliances is I believe, a Season 2 episode of Voyager. That's actually a pretty good episode until the last 5 minutes, at which case it gets me so angry that it is still one of my least favorite episodes of Voyager, despite the fact that the other 40 minutes of screen time is fine. By the way, Trek likes to do that semi-frequently. We'll be seeing an Enterprise episode like that later, too. So, like, I couldn't call it Alliances a lamentation, because it's not. It's this much of a decent episode, and this much of completely ruining it. But that's what this episode is for me. So even though I sound like I'm being negative, do be clear, I'm mostly just dissecting this episode, because this is actually kind of decent in many ways. But let's move forward a little bit. So there's a lot of little details and nuances in this episode in the background, which I really like. Probably my favorite example is when Twilight goes over, opens up the closet, and a bunch of presents fall on Flurry Heart. We then cut to a long shot where we can actually visibly see Cadence and Shining in the background, whose expression is something along the lines of... And then, as soon as she's pulled out of the presents, right? Now, I mentioned that because there's actually a lot of little details and smart editing within this episode like that. Lots of good segues, lots of good background elements, and lots of good animation going on. So this is a very well presented and executed episode, regardless of any other issues I have with it. So they also, speaking of things the episode does right, there's a really cool sequence where they show the difference, and the episode later contradicts this, but there's a really cool scene where they show the difference between someone who has experience in using their telekinesis, Twilight, and someone who doesn't, Flurry. The bear going across the little, what do you call it? The little, the bookshelf obstacle course? I don't know what else to call it. You know, and Twilight effortlessly and smoothly goes through, and then bonk is what Flurry Heart Bear goes through. And that makes sense. Anybody who's interacted with a child, especially a young child, knows exactly how they don't even know how to grip things properly yet. And even when they figure out how to close their fingers and close their fists, they still don't have the dexterity or the strength to understand what kinds of strength are necessary, or all the precision. All that stuff you just learn through experience, right? As I've pointed out before on a Voyager episode, I don't know why we've got Voyager on the brain right now, you don't instinctually do this, right? What I just did here? This is not instinctual. This is a learned talent to learn exactly how hard to grip, at what angle, with what fingers, because I'm actually only expressing this with 2 of my fingers, you can see right here, because this is a light little water bottle, right? All of this is learned through experience, right? And I mean, to use a counter example, what's something heavier? I don't have anything heavier. You get my point. All of this is something that we learn, and so it's good that they show that Flurry doesn't actually know how to do most of the stuff yet. So I'm with it. That's cool. They will completely screw that up later, but at least that is cool in this particular scene. I mean, I don't know if I agree with that trihexia, but Lord knows that was a plot development I prefer to just ignore. Anyways, so it is interesting, speaking of good details, to continue praising the episode, they showcase that Shining and Cadence are both flustered, but not completely out of it flustered. Why is this relevant? 2 reasons. One, the worst part of taking care of a baby is when the baby is first born. Let me tell you that. From experience, 3 times at this point. That's a trip, right? But the other thing, and this is a slightly more subtle thing, is it's very strongly implied, oh yeah, especially your first baby, oh my god. I will freely admit, most of the stuff I'm going to talk about in this episode, I did not learn with the first baby I had to take care of. Anyways. But the other thing is Cadence was fine last time and Shining Armor was not, implying very clearly that Shining Armor was the one who was staying at home and taking care of the child. Whereas in this episode, it's shown that both of them are flustered to show that they have now since evened out the workload. Which, again, makes sense. Remember, these are royalty who have full-time jobs, and having... What I'm trying to say is that even if you weren't royalty, and if you just worked, you know, at a 9 to 5 at McDonald's for a living, when you first have a child, what's going to happen is one of those people is going to take some maternity leave, one way or the other, to just take care of that kid before you settle into an actual schedule of balancing responsibilities. So that actually lines up pretty well as well. Yeah, it also means there's no wet nurse. Again, that whole lack of a nanny thing I already mentioned, which, again, we'll come back to later. So then... Interesting world-building idea, which I might steal completely, by the way. The idea of a species that can just throw up a barrier of defense. Now, obviously, when you're an adult, that has all sorts of implications, but when you're a baby, well, you're not going to try to hide or use it defensively or strategically, you're just going to use it instinctively. And that's it, right? Just like Flurry Heart here does. So, actually, that's kind of a cool idea and something that they do a neat job with. Also, the fact that she can't wink properly, because winking is actually a learned skill as well. Doing this, you know, I actually know some people who can't wink. I also know 2 people personally who had to learn how to wink, and all they could do is the double wink with both eyes like that, which is exactly what she does. It's kind of like raising your eyebrow, right? This is a learned skill. You don't just know how to raise your eyebrow when you're younger. So yeah, Flurry is super adorbs, and they get a lot of stuff right with her. Again, pretty good episode until the last 5 minutes. Let's move forward. So, then there's the scene where Cadence and Shining are trying to understand art. Love the expressions, because it's like... And, like, they think they get it, but they don't. But it... Speaking as someone who has studied art for years, both professionally and in terms of, you know, just studies, in terms of schooling, yeah, that's absolutely correct. That is so true. Now that being said, 1,000 nights in a hallway. Okay. I gotta be honest, that's not art. It's not. Just having... I do like that Shining totally gets the night hallway thing, by the way, because of course he would, right? But what, as much as that's all cool and awesome and wonderful, that's not art. That's a blank canvas. That being stated, just because I want to show off my own artistic talents just a little bit here, what you would do is you would make something that is an implication on dark to gray scale. In other words, rather than just smearing black paint over an entire palette and saying you're done, which is lazy, you would instead have to spend a substantial amount of effort, and it was very difficult to properly pull across the idea of implied art. Now, what I mean by that, because I don't remember the terminology, so please forgive me. What you want, in order to do the exact same type of art style that he did, probably a lot of harsh lines to indicate the hallways, you know? So not morphic, not like smooth or lots of curves or organic looking, but instead very harsh geometric styles. Except you need to make it so you're not just painting the hallway. There needs to be, like, the beginnings of what might actually be... Yeah, very repetitive, too. There needs to be the beginnings of what might be a column, but you don't finish it. Or maybe you finish it in a different shade. Or maybe you finish it in something that actually turns into another column, which itself is the ceiling for another column, which itself is the ceiling for another column. Just kind of visually indicating how much the hallways just blur, right? And it has to be dark. So, making all of this dark and making all of this repetitive is something that's a skill that actually is pretty hard to pull across properly. And forgive me for getting upset about this, but I've learned a lot about how much work and effort goes into crafting this kind of thing, especially in the last several years as I've really started digging into studying both visual and audio storytelling, which is the kind of thing you could do with this. I can literally picture in my head how I would do this. Now, granted, I don't have the skill to do that, but if I could just transplant it from my brain out, I could see it. And that would be hard as hell to do. And that would be art. Throwing black paint at a canvas is not art. That rant over, Spearhead is awesome. Probably the best part, second best part of the episode after Flurry Heart's adorableness. Just saying. It's as if you're famous enough. No comment. So we've got the lack of art. Hang on. So getting kids, so this is when we get, it's difficult to get kids to eat. Anybody who's ever taken care of a young child knows exactly what this is like. It doesn't even make sense. But for some reason, getting a young child, especially a very young child, to eat is actually quite difficult to do. So, yeah, covered in peas, been there. Nothing else to add to that. Yeah, exactly, Treven. So then, you know, racing through the area with the shopping cart. I used to do it with my niece, actually. Although my niece couldn't magically move the wheels. And here we have the first actual cracks in the episode. The earlier nitpicks are just that, nitpicks. There's something that can be fixed in one sentence, right? So that's a minor complaint. The fact that Twilight does not actually hear or in any way detect the fact that Flurry is magically moving the cart and colliding with the thing until it's already happened is irritating to me. However, I'm going to go ahead and admit, upon this particular viewing, I'm willing to give it more leeway than I was previously, and the reason why is because Twilight does not have a radar. Let me explain. Now, I don't know how many of you know what the kid radar is, but for anybody of you who has taken care of a young child, you know exactly what the kid radar is. It is, so you're paying attention, a part of your brain, there's a process in the back of your brain, there's a program running in the back of your brain, which is just paying attention to everything. The pressure of the room, the sounds, how things smell, how things look, everything, every single sense that you have is being intaken and constantly processed by that background program. That's your radar. Anything goes off, and it immediately catches your attention, and you notice like that. And this actually happened literally last Tuesday. We were sitting down for dinner. We were having some lovely shredded pork along with rice and beans. And all three of us, all three of the adults, which is myself, my sister, and her husband, all at the exact same moment, I kid you not, were like, where is she? Because we suddenly couldn't detect where she was, because the radar went off. Now, she was just down the hall playing quietly in the corner, which is usually what it is. But that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, that radar is something that anybody who has done that knows exactly what that feels like. Now, I was pissed off when I first saw this because Twilight's total lack of radar. This time around, it's like, shoot, of course she doesn't have the radar yet. This is her first time. And we're starting to see how I think this episode should have been structured. Because making the whole thing, as weird as this may sound, even though Spearhead is awesome, I think this episode could be better restructured to be entirely about Twilight's first time babysitting instead of this weird episode about time management and lack of proper adulting. I think focusing entirely on first-time babysitting would have actually worked better, to showcase specifically not only the talents that Twilight doesn't have, but the talents that most people who have taken care of a child full-time do have. For example, you could have a contrasting scene, maybe later in the episode, where something's going on, or maybe earlier in the episode, before the episode even starts, where both Cadence and Shining immediately notice something is wrong, whereas Twilight doesn't even catch it, right? Because Twilight doesn't have the radar. Just little restructuring like that I think would help this episode a lot, but I'm getting off topic. Point being, Twilight doesn't notice Jack. This is a recurring element. Well, Pinkie Pie was learning... That's a different thing, Lord Harrimont. You could argue it's the same thing, and I'm not going to argue against that. I'm going to shoot you in the face, though. Alright, now that that's out of the way, I would argue that that is a different type of episode, because Pinkie Pie's episode, and I know this because I actually just watched that yesterday, because I have MLP up while I'm working on editing, is, that was all about someone learning what taking care of a child was. Now, I know what you're thinking. What's the difference? My point being that Pinkie Pie was trying to understand the concept of actually being responsible for a child, rather than just playing with a kid, which, as anybody will tell you, is a colossal difference. This is more about Twilight getting accustomed to the idea of the needs and necessities of actually trying to be a good aunt, rather than being a fun thing every now and again. I'll admit those are very similar. But there's a gradients, I think, that is acceptable. Hang on, I gotta kill Darth Medoro again here. There we go. And yeah, this is also supposed to be just over a few hours. It could have been like a developing thing. You know, this could have led to something. To my knowledge, this doesn't go anywhere, too. Anyways. Moving on. Yeah, of course Pinky has an apology stamp. Why wouldn't she? That's probably some of the best business they do is selling apology sweets. I mean, think about it. Good morning, Baron. All right, so where the heck was I? Where's my notes? So nobody hears her. Cool. Then they go to the place where it's like, all right, let's talk books. We need to borrow some books. Alien alicorns versus space pirates. The science there is preposterous. I mean, nobody actually likes Star Trek. Wait. Burnferno, a handsome dragon warrior. The kids wouldn't like that. Then she holds up something that is clearly one of the Lord of the Rings books. That got a grin out of me. I had to rewind just to double check. I'm not sure which one. It could also be The Hobbit, which is a kid's story, but, you know. Anyways, this is now the second time Twilight has not paid attention. This is actually in my notes where I mentioned the kid radar. Can I just share one last anecdote about the kid radar? I know I've actually shared this story before. I won't tell you the whole story. All I'll tell you is that one time in the middle of the night, while it was just me and my niece, you know, Sis was off doing her overnight job at the time, I woke up from a dead sleep because something was wrong with my niece. Because that radar program was still running while I was asleep. Now that's not bragging, because anyone with kid radar would do the exact same thing. That's my point. Anyone who has dealt with that absolutely knows what that's like. Just wake up in the middle of the night. It was like 1 in the morning. Okay, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Gotta roam out there. See what's wrong. Anyways. So. This gets to the second art piece. At least he put some actual effort into this one. You know, the horseshoes, the footprints. A guard's journey. Still not really impressed with this one. So this then leads to what is actually probably the best constructed sequence of scenes in the entire episode. When they're at the Sweetie Mark Cutie place. Oh god, what's the name of the place? The place where the cakes live, where Pinky lives as well. I can't think of the name of it. Sugar Cube Corner, thank you. The Sugar Cube Corner scenes are extremely well constructed. So, we once again, first of all, we see how incredibly organized Pinky is, because of course she is. And you know, I love how she's got a list of everyone's personal favorite sweet. I have something of a list like that too, I'll go ahead and be honest. It's nowhere near as extensive as hers, because mine is like 5 people strong, but still. You know, I do like to get the things people like for people. Including her own, of course. The sampler platter. Because, of course, Pinky would like that. Cheerio milk cookies with yellow sprinkles, by the way, is the only one I wrote down, which, yeah, that tracks. The editing and back and forth of things escalating while Pinky lists the things that are apology, you know, everyone's favorite, and then Spike trying to find the second thing, and then Flurry deciding the best way to make this work is to go ahead and split it up because she's a baby and doesn't understand things, and the other 2 babies who are older than her, doesn't really show, but they are older than her, are like, what? You broke our toy, and then immediately team up against her, and then there's immediately a fight, and of course Flurry wants attention. It's more of Twilight being a terrible caretaker, but it is still an incredibly well-constructed and excellently edited sequence. Which, of course, leads to the final bit. Pinky, what's your favorite? The sample platter. Just, I love that. Anyway, sorry. So, this then leads to her saying, it's been so terrible so far, it can't possibly get worse. Never say that, first of all. As I think I mentioned a few times in the Babylon 5 ruminations, it can always get worse. If you think you've hit rock bottom, no, you haven't. Sorry. There are ways for it to get worse. So, granted, MLP doesn't even get into the same zip code as that. I'm just pointing it out. Never say that in fiction. Never say that in real life. All right, so this leads to another well-edited sequence. Raga was strong, for fear gave him power, as Flurry is lifting half the living room up. Now, this then leads to... So this is all cool, and Flurry's freaking out trying to find the thing. And this leads to Twilight failing at keeping up with Flurry in telekinesis. Okay, you've pushed past my ability to believe you on that. I'm not even sure how to fix that one, as weird as that may sound. The only way I would fix that, like if I was doing a script rewrite, if I was doing a polishing pass, I would just eject that part of the scene entirely, replace it with something else. Because that makes no damn sense and doesn't add anything to the episode. Just have Twilight overpower it, and then be like, okay. And then cut right to the, she yells, or I don't want to use the word yells, because that's not actually what she does. Her disciplining Flurry. Just cut straight to that part, right? It doesn't add anything, and it just fills up time for like another 90 seconds, which isn't necessary. S.A. Ross brings up an excellent point, which I actually forgot to write down. She brought a young child into a hospital full of contagious people who just got sick. Now, this is doubly eyebrow-raising because this show has already established an anti-sickness barrier, which has actually been used before by Cadence. Now, I know what you're saying. Well, that's Cadence's spell, not Twilight's. Twilight is really good at being able to remember and replicate other people's spells. That's something that she's actually shown several times. So, maybe do that? Once again, I feel like that's basically a nitpick, something that could be smoothed over really easily with one quick change. Hi, Flurry Heart, and Flurry Heart's just hanging around there, and then you just see that specific graphic, because you know it's kind of like a web-looking thing, shimmer over her, and there you go. She's got the anti-sick barrier. Done. No additional lines of dialogue, no additional edits needed. It's fixed. So then the episode loses me. Finally. The whole episode's actually been pretty okay. I'd say probably yellow, honestly. Nothing great. Maybe the editing and style would push it up to orange. That's debatable. But this is when the episode absolutely torpedoes down into either blue or green territory. Where do I begin? Twilight says, Flurry Heart, put us down this instant. Do note that that is not yelling, and that's important. That is not a temper snap. I'll talk about that in a minute, okay? That is just her that's the parent tone. That's what that is. Right? Again, most of you probably know what that is, either on the receiving end or on the giving end. It's not a tone we like to use, but it's a tone that every now and again you have to pull out, because every now and again the child just is not listening. Again, to use a recent example, my sister had to use that tone very recently to insist that a certain child did not climb up a staircase by herself when nobody could actually reach out to assist her in case something went wrong, because I was covered in poison ivy and she had a chainsaw in her hand. No. And every now and again, it's... Okay. This is when we get a little bit more into debate, I'll go ahead and admit that, but I'm going to speak as if my opinions on child rearing are factual, because I don't know how else to do that. But it is worth noting that everything I'm saying is just my opinion about how you should raise a child. Okay? Cool. So, you do need to discipline. You do. In my opinion, the overwhelming majority of brats, both young and old, throughout the world, are a result of bad discipline when it comes to child rearing. Now, this, well, it's, you probably can't see it, Trihexy, but I've still got the poison ivy all over the place. You can't see the one on my pant, or under my pants, excuse me, on my leg, but I've got what has to be like this large of a rash on my leg from the poison ivy. But yeah, it sucks. It does suck. That's the thing that really is messed up, that most people don't address. Most people don't address the fact that it sucks to have to raise your voice to your child or to your niece or whatever. Does it still itch? Not at this point. I've been putting stuff on it. I'm in the recovery range. This coming Tuesday, I'm going to finish off the poison ivy, hopefully, fingers crossed, but that's the goal, to finally be done with it. But yeah, you have to know how to discipline. You have to know when to discipline. You have to not discipline too little, and you have to not discipline too much. It is difficult to do, and I'm not trying to say that it's just an easy answer. In fact, if anything, that's the freaking point. There is no easy answer. Because you don't even discipline the same way for all situations. Right? You have to know when to do funk, when to do funk, and when to do flunk. That's the worst way I've ever described something, but I stand by it. Yeah, parenting is very hard. It is a incredibly, ludicrously complex thing. Probably one of the hardest jobs on the frickin' planet. To do properly, at least. And it depends on the child, because different children behave differently. It also depends on you. In many cases, it depends on the other person. You know, your wife or husband or significant other or sister or brother, whoever else happens to be the adult figure nearby. Because if two people are disciplining in different ways, all you're doing is mixed signals to the child, which isn't going to help anything. And I'll cover mixed signals in a second, too. So, back to the episode. Twilight says, Flurry Heart put us down this instant. Now, I wrote that down specifically because this is important. That is the correct response. Flurry Heart does this, and then Twilight comes over and says, that was very, very bad. You could have hurt some pony. Again, direct quote. Now, I bring that up because everything Twilight has done in that specific moment is fairly correct. Now, she's been pretty crap as a parent the whole episode, which arguably is the point of the episode, but that was the correct response. Because Flurry Heart was freaking out. She did need the shock to pull her out of the fear state. You notice it did, by the way. Because when a child gets stuck in a fear state, it's basically a 30 go to 10. It's just a cycle, right? So you need something to shoot them out of that. You need something to knock them out of that. So that shock, that's most of the reason of raising your voice. It's not because you're actually angry, and it's not even necessarily because they're in trouble. It's because you need to snap them out of it. So, boom, snap her out of it, which worked, and then what you did was wrong, which is correct. And I keep pointing this out because what immediately happens after that is the exact wrong thing to do. I mentioned brats earlier, right? I guarantee you with high certainty, I don't know this for absolute certainty, but I guarantee with high certainty that the overwhelming majority of brats in the world, regardless of age, are children like Flurry Heart who had this kind of mixed signal scenario like Twilight gives to her. If a child does something wrong and you snap at them, that's a little different. A temper snap is a different thing. Most of you probably know what a temper snap is because most of you have probably snapped via temper at some point in your life. Probably not at a child, but at someone, right? Now, sometimes parents do snap at children. Let's talk about this for a second. That ain't cool, but that is a different thing, and that is absolutely not what Twilight does here. That is something where you are, for whatever reason, emotionally or mentally distressed or distraught to the point where you're not handling it, and so something is happening that is a mild irritant, because it is mild, let's be honest, and that makes you snap. You lose your temper, just like you do to anyone else. The catch is, a temper snap at a child is much worse in basically every way. Because a temper snap at a child, all they're taking in is, oh my god, what'd I do wrong? Especially if you're their caretaker, guardian, parent, adult, you know, aunt, uncle, whatever, grandparent. Because now they are taking in, especially as a young child, oh god, and they will probably have an actual legitimate fear response, like Flurry did with Twilight here. Flurry's response is as if Twilight snapped at her, even though Twilight didn't. This is also problematic because, to be as blunt as let me approach this from a weird angle. How many of you have ever been to anywhere like a fast food place or a grocery store where the attitude of the cashier or the person behind the counter was not good? Where they had a bad attitude, right? They probably didn't snap at you, but they were probably just like, ah, whatever. What can I get for you? Right? I imagine 100% of you have encountered that. Now, I in no way want to sound judgmental about this, but how many of you immediately dismissed it as, ugh, instead of thinking, oh gosh, I wonder what's going on in their life right now? I bring that up because most adults I know don't know how to process the fact that someone acts in a certain manner because of crap in their life. An adult, generally speaking, doesn't know how to process that you're going through all this nonsense and that's why your attitude is bad, or that's why you snapped at someone. Now put yourself in the shoes of a child who has none of the experience or social capacity that an adult does. None of that processing, none of that understanding, who absolutely can't understand that the reason you snapped is because you've got stuff going on. I want to be 100% clear. The snap is still bad, and snapping at a child is extremely a bad thing to do. But I bring up this point because I am emphasizing why it's even worse. Because the child doesn't understand, and frankly can't understand. Now, I had this whole speech prepared before I even started the episode because I, by memory, thought that Twilight snapped at her. She didn't, which makes this much, much worse. So, obviously, you know, instead she tries to discipline her, and then Flurry is like, oh my gosh, no, I'm so scared. And Twilight immediately says, oh, I'm so sorry, and apologizes. And then says, and I wrote this one down word for word, none of this is your fault. Remember I mentioned mixed signals earlier? Once again, to really emphasize the parallel, most adults don't actually understand how to take mixed signals. You think a child knows how to deal with this? The fact that Twilight apologizes is why brats are brats. Because I have seen in real life many times where a parent has been distracted, dealing with something else, and then the child acts out, and then the parent says, don't do that, and then the child starts crying, probably fake crying. I don't know their kids, so I don't know their cries, but probably fake crying, and then the parent says, oh, I'm so sorry, let me make it up to you. It's okay, you didn't do anything wrong. Yes, they did! Now, I'm not saying you should wander around smacking kids upside the head with a 4x4, but again, you do need to actually discipline. You need to make it clear that they have done something wrong, otherwise they can't understand what wrong is. You do have to actually emphasize that this is a no. And Twilight completely screws that up. And the episode treats that... Now, this is the thing that really pisses me off. This is clearly the writers talking at this point, not Twilight. The argument could be held that Twilight is screwing this up so badly in the worst way that she possibly could be because of the aforementioned lack of experience, but the problem is the episode treats us like the correct answer. You know what I mean by that, right? And episodes usually slant something like this is correct or this is right. And I mean, I do that too, right? Yeah, this is an Aesop, exactly. This is an obviously set up to be an Aesop. And that's what pisses me off. Because no! That's wrong! That is absolutely, again, my opinion for child rearing, that is absolutely not how you should take care of a child. Now, that doesn't dismiss that Twilight earlier was wrong for not properly paying attention and not properly taking care of her and not properly managing her schedule and not properly showcasing it and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, this is why I kept saying I'd cover this earlier. This is why I think this episode should be restructured about Twilight's lack of experience, not about this bizarro Aesop from nowhere, right? And that's why I think this episode would be much stronger if we completely restructured it to slant it that way instead. Instead, it's this nonsense at the end that makes me want to punch the writers. Not literally, that would be horrible, but you get my point. Hang on, it's Lore Mom. Sorry, I was going to wait, but I've still got a few things to say, and she's like, are you there? I'm here, comma, sorry, exclamation mark. You caught me in the middle of doing my Sunday streams, period. No additional side effects so far, comma, thank goodness, period. But yeah, exactly. There is the bones of a good episode in here, and it is brilliantly executed, and there's a lot of really cool scenes. It reminds me of her. Why? It's small, just like she is. Go to her. Like there's, you can see the goodness of the episode underneath the rest of the track. Ah. Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think this qualifies as blue. There's just too much good in it to make it not blue. But you could please understand why this episode pisses me off so damn much. This is like having an Aesop of how it's okay to throw litter out the window because it's just going to hit the side of the road and nobody cares about that. Like that's the equivalent of what this episode is trying to get across. And you could probably see why that makes me go... like a physical clench of, what? That's your Aesop? That? But yeah, no, it is a fun episode. Other than, hang on, do I have anything else to talk about? Oh yeah, I wanted to loop back. I wanted to loop back about one other thing I kept talking about to help smooth over the episode a little bit. So you remember how I mentioned that it's weird that they're just taking this to Twilight and they're desperate for a day off? Make them clingy. Make them helicopter parents. Now, that could be a whole episode by itself. Shining and Cadence are helicopter parents that need to stop being helicopter parents. But do that. Set that up here. Pay that off in a later episode. Have that be something that comes back. And I personally think that would smooth over all of my issues with them and their need to do this. And let me enumerate them in case you forgot. First of all, and it would make sense. She's the first alicorn ever. She's their first child. They're relatively young. Like, they're mentioned to be, what, mid-20s? They're not that old. I mean, Shining is Twilight's brother, and Twilight's not super old, so... Right? So, it makes sense that they would be. And again, this isn't me being insulting. This is me stating, this is a trap plenty of parents fall into, and thus would be a perfect tone and style for an episode. Apparently, we're having a helicopter parent episode later, so we'll cover that in a minute. But my point is, emphasize that the reason why she hasn't been being taken care of by Sunburst, why there's no nannies, why there's no wet nurse, is because they haven't been allowing any. Because they haven't been, no, we'll take care of her, it's okay, we've got this. And thus that helps smooth over this whole thing, and why the only person they're willing to trust with this is Twilight. Again, that even makes a degree of sense, even though it is probably still wrong, in character, because of the fact that she's a frickin' alicorn child. So the only person you want to trust with her is Twilight, someone who is very skilled in magic, who is an alicorn, who's strong enough to keep up with it, who you know personally, yada yada yada, right? So there's a lot of logic behind, boom, well, the only person we'll allow to babysit is Twilight. Now, I bring this up because, frankly, that's my headcanon. I think they are actually helicopter parents. And you know why? Because they get a couple of hours. Remember, this whole episode occurs across a little over 3 hours. We have that because Spike mentions the deadline at the beginning of the episode, and the event the deadline was for is at the end of the episode. So it's a little over 3 hours. They get 3 hours off for the first time in however many months. And all they can think about is how much they desperately want to get back to their baby. That's a helicopter parent. Now, I'm sorry. I love my niece to death. But anytime I could get some time off when I was taking care of her full time was just... And I imagine any of you out there who have ever taken care of a child knows what I mean by that. And Spike reads to the kids because he's awesome. There's an apology cake, too. Gotta have the apology cake. Also, Flurry got into some mischief, but it wasn't her fault. Grind teeth together. I apologize for going off on this episode, but I really wanted to really hammer in how much they freaking failed at their intended Aesop. How much that just face-palmed hard. Again, you see why I compare this to Star Trek Voyager's alliances. So, now we gotta rate this thing. I'm thinking lamentation status. Sounds like I fell off the spreadsheet. Here we go. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I agree. I'm thinking green. Does anyone want to contest green? There's simply too much good in the episode to qualify as blue. Which is unfortunate. Because this episode pisses me off so damn hard. But there's just too much good in it to give it a full blue. Okay, Lord Harriman wants yellow. Didn't I shoot you in the face? Damn it, Lord Harriman. Stop healing. God. I actually agree with that. Spearhead was just a shining light in the episode. Whoops, that's yellow. I'm just mind blanking here. Don't mind me. I'm with it, I swear. Whatever.